I know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yes, the final will be a regular test, but you do have a test today.
Yeah.
And if you'll remind me to make it go active before we leave here, otherwise it'll probably be noon before I can get to that. Because that's just my life right now. We're on current slide. We only have one slide. I want to be able to see what people are saying. Just at least see who's here. It's not doing what it's supposed to. Okay. I just want to see who's here. All right, so before we get started, I've already told y'all, but I'm going to say it again. You have a test today. 24 hours. I know I'm a sucker, and I know I've reopened tests in the past, but it's getting really annoying when the test is open and almost as soon as it closes, somebody emails me and says, "Oh, I didn't realize we had a test. Can you reopen the test?" And so far I've been doing it. I've been reopening it. But take the test in the first 24 hours. Eventually I'm going to get tired enough of it that I'm going to say no. And you don't want to be the one that I say no to. Because then you'll feel bad and I'll feel bad and you'll have a 0. And just not a good situation. So, people out in YouTube land, take your test in the first 24 hours. Get it done. And if you've noticed, I'm really not that good at remembering when 24 hours is up. So you usually have a little bit longer, but don't count on it. Get it done. Okay, so we are going to finish this up since I've already announced we're having the test. I can't talk today. And we stopped with the Articles of Confederation. So the first round of Republican idealism came in the form of state constitutions. The federal constitution didn't adopt all of the issues that the states did. Before March of '81, the Congressional Congress was exercising with absolutely no real legal no constitution at all. I mean, they were just kind of winging it, basically. You know, but they had started working on it. They started working on a constitution as early as 1776 in July. Sign the Declaration of Independence. Let's start working on a constitution. It's going to take 5 years. 5 years of war, so it's not a constant 5 years where you're uninterrupted, but it takes a while to get it written. And the main writer was John Dickinson. And what they end up with is something they call the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. And it's adopted in 1777, but I said we didn't have a constitution in '81. That's because the states had to ratify it. The states had to agree that they would abide by this agreement, Constitution, and that's going to take a few more years. And all of the states but Maryland pretty quickly ratified it, but Maryland held out fighting over Western lands. And the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union really didn't do a whole lot. It was not a groundbreaking document. It basically legalized the status quo. It basically said, hey, this is what we're doing. We're just going to describe it and agree to it. They called themselves, the country, the United States of America and Congress assembled. And they gave Congress a multitude of responsibilities, but very little authority. We're fighting because there's tyrannical authority over us. So people usually swing to the other side. We want something with little authority. We're giving the authority to the states. And Congress was going to serve as a collective substitute for a monarch. We're not going to have the President, Congress, Supreme Court yet. Articles of Confederation is something different. So Congress had full power over foreign affairs and questions of war and peace. They would decide disputes between the states. They had power over coinage, the Postal Service, Indian Affairs, Western Territories, but they had very little authority. There were no courts set up, no power of enforcement, and more importantly, no power to levy taxes. But we were fighting against a parliament that was levying taxes. We're going to give that to the states. Any measures dealing with wars, treaties, coinage, finance, army, or navy had to be approved by 9 states, so 9 out of 13. You had to have unanimous approval for duties on imports. Duties are technically not taxes. Amendments also had to be unanimous. It's really hard to get 13 people to agree, much less 13 colonies to agree. But they now have a constitution, and it reflects not as closely as the state constitutions, but it reflects those political, radical ideas of the Republican ideology. The revolution was also a social revolution. Equality becomes an issue during the Revolutionary War. And we don't always talk about equality of white people, but there is something of an issue in that. Most of the time when we talk about the ruling class, we're talking about the elite, right? Well, the American Revolution expanded that idea of who's going to be involved in politics. As one person put it, a Virginia gentleman remembered being in a tavern when a group of farmers came in, spitting and pulling off their muddy boots without regard for the sensibilities of the gentleman present. And I quote, "The spirit of independence was converted into equality, and everyone who bore arms esteems himself on a footing with his neighbors, and no doubt each of these men considers himself in every aspect my equal." Those are the words of the gentleman. That was not always the case. But they all took up arms together. They all boycotted England together. They all fought for this together. And out of the war, after the war, there is a sense that we're in this together. We fought together. It's not my right to deprive you of the right to vote. So property, most of the time, voting rights in the colonies had been based on property ownership. That doesn't completely go away, but it almost virtually goes away. You have almost universal white male suffrage. White male suffrage. But it's a step. And there is a loss of deference, which was, I'm sure, very upsetting to a lot of people. By that I mean, you didn't necessarily, and it's not a matter of politeness, yes sir, no sir, that's politeness, but you didn't necessarily step aside for that gentleman just because he had more money than you. You were just as good as he was. So you lose some of that. Slavery. I mean, we get this pointed out all the time, and our founding fathers realized the hypocrisy of fighting for independence while keeping slaves. They weren't stupid. They were economically bound, but they weren't stupid. Racism was high. It's a different time. There are even scientific bases at the time for racism that people bought into, believed in. But they did realize the hypocrisy in this. And there were some attempts to change the condition of slavery. All but Georgia, and later South Carolina will reopen it. All of the colonies but Georgia closed their colonies to the slave trade, to the external slave trade. So at the end of the Revolutionary War, the only colony that's still importing slaves is Georgia. Not a great step in the right direction, but it's a step in the right direction. South Carolina will reopen theirs, but then they close it again. And one by one, states start getting rid of slavery. Vermont, and it's usually a gradual plan, and I didn't write down all of them, but I did write down the dates for New York. It's usually something like when the children that are slaves now reach a certain age, they will be free. And then after that, there will be no more, you can't bring in more slaves, there will be no more slavery. Vermont ends it in 1777, Massachusetts in 80, Rhode Island in 84. New York's quite a bit later, they go to 99, and their date of freedom is July 4th, 1827. And that was to give the slave owners a little bit of time to recoup their losses. And I know I'm talking about this in very economic terms, but in a sense, that's how they saw it. It was an investment. But the revolution gave slaves other ways to get out. The British very quickly offered freedom to any slave that would switch sides. If you come fight for us, when we win, you'll be free. Problem was they didn't win. They did take some of the slaves who fought with them when they left. Not a lot. Racism is still an issue. They still considered them beneath them. Washington finally allows blacks to fight in the revolution with the promise of freedom afterwards. And some of them even got the land bonuses that the Army was offering to the soldiers. So that was a way a slave could become free through the revolution. Manumission, which is a long word for owners giving their slaves freedom, just voluntarily, you're free now, go away. That became easier in the during the revolution and in the post-revolutionary period. And there were slave owners that did that. But by far, the easiest way slaves got freedom during the Revolutionary War is they take advantage of the confusion, the chaos, and they simply ran away. It was a whole lot easier to do that. Go to Canada. They don't have slavery in Canada. I can't remember if Mexico had abolished slavery by this time, but leave. As simple as that. Some of them didn't even leave the colonies, but they would leave like South Carolina and go to Vermont. Take up a new name, be a new person, you're free. Running was a great way to get free from slaves. Women. The war affected women. There were women, a lot of women supported the Army. We've talked about the Daughters of Liberty, the Homespun, the Tea. Some actually supported the Army by fighting. It was kind of, it seems weird to us, but it was not weird at the time. A lot of women followed their husbands to wherever they were fighting. They would go as camp followers, where the term comes from, and set up their home wherever their husband was. These are voluntary armies. And they served a purpose. They served a civilizing purpose because men are nicer when women are around, just in general. They, were a comfort to their husband. They cooked, they cleaned, did laundry. But some women actually took up arms. Deborah Sampson, her husband was he was artillery, and he went down with heat stroke. No, Deborah Sampson's a different one. Molly Pitcher. Okay, Molly Pitcher takes up her husband's artillery post. I mean, you probably all heard about her at some point, maybe third grade. She would bring water to the artillerymen on the line, and her husband went down with heat stroke, and she picked up his position. Deborah Sampson is the one that actually went into battle dressed as a man, and they didn't find out for several years. She fought for a while. And women also latched onto this as a time to maybe grab some equality. Judith Sargent Murray wrote a book called On the Equality of the Sexes, arguing that women were just as capable as men of making political decisions. Abigail Adams, whose husband, John Adams, was very involved as one of the founding fathers, wrote to her husband, quote, "In the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire that you would remember the ladies. Do not put such unlimited power into the hand of husbands." She goes on, explaining men were, quote, "naturally tyrannical. Why then not put out of the power the vicious and the lawless, to use with cruelty and indignity? If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." So basically, she uses the Patriots' chant against them. No taxation without representation. You can't make laws that apply to us if you don't let us be part of it. It's a nice thought. Adams was clearly not going to go there, but there are people who are voicing it. And most states' constitutions actually, said in the Constitution, white men can vote. New Jersey left that out, assumed that everybody would realize that they meant men. And for a couple of years, women could vote in New Jersey because they didn't specifically say you couldn't. Some of the other, and we got one more minority group, the Indians. Indians didn't fare well in the Revolution. They gained no political status. A lot of them were wiped out, homes burned, villages burned, crops burned. Americans had no love for the Indians. Some, like the Oneidas, fought on the side of the Patriots, with promises of future well-being. Those pledges were like they will always be, and America immediately forgotten as soon as the war was over. So the Indians make no gains, actually lose a lot, because now there's no king saying, you colonists can't go over the Appalachians. Now they have free run all the way to the Mississippi. One other social issue that took a beating during the Revolutionary War was religion. The Anglican Church probably being the biggest victim. The Anglican Church is the Church of England. It was formed when Henry VIII wanted a divorce and couldn't get one. It is thoroughly English, and it is thoroughly kicked out of the colonies. Well, I say thoroughly. It's really not. They changed the name. The Anglican Church becomes the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church is born out of the Revolution. But the bigger issue for religion is that the states, almost all of the states, are going to adopt those radical Republican ideas of a freedom of religion. So instead of instead of one church and mandatory, the colonies adopt a system of pluralistic churches. You can go to any church you want, or you don't have to go to church. It's completely voluntary. There's no state-run churches anymore at this point. And the churches themselves start feeding on these Republican ideas. This is when a lot of churches will adopt a governing body that very much resembles the state-run Republican ideas. The Methodists adopt one in 84, the Episcopals in 89, the Presbyterians in 89. The Presbyterian, I know the most about it. The Presbyterian Church is run by a presbytery. There is a General Assembly that meets once a year, goes over the worship services, their policies, and makes rules for the entire church. It's not, the Presbyterian Church in San Angelo does its own thing, and the Presbyterian Church in Dallas does its own thing. You have an overarching guide for all of the churches. And a lot of churches adopt this at this time. This is 89 is also when the United States gets its first Catholic bishop, which in the Catholic Church is a big thing. We have many more now. The first one was John Carroll, and he was stationed in Baltimore. Okay, lastly, we're going to get done early because I want to get on my soapbox about something else. Lastly, it was a cultural revolution. We started out as 13 separate colonies, answering to London. We end up the United States of America assembled. We end up as one country. Now, make no doubt, there were definite state biases. Most people identified by their state, but now we're Americans. We're all Americans. There is a very real and growing sense of nationalism in the country, that we're all in it together and that we're one group. Along with that, there is an undeniable sense of destiny. And this harkens all the way back to John Winthrop and the City on a Hill, or the Beacon on a Hill. There is this undeniable idea that we are a country of destiny and that we should be an example to the world. And we're certainly the only ones trying this Republican idea. The 4th of July becomes our big Independence Day celebration, really our the first national holiday. When they declared independence, it was actually when they first adopted it, not signed it, first adopted it was July 2nd. So logically, July 2nd should have been our Independence Day. But they were involved in a war. And a year passed, and no one really noticed until July 3rd. So July 4th has become Independence Day. And we'll go back to John Adams writing his wife, predicts that the date would be remembered. Of course, he's predicting it's going to be July 2nd. His prediction is that the future generations would remember the date as, quote, their day of deliverance, unquote. He said people would celebrate with, quote, solemn acts of devotion to the God Almighty, with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, fireworks, from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward and forevermore. Pretty close prediction. He got the celebration description right. He just missed the day by 2 days because they were fighting a war and no one really noticed that a year had passed. So July 4th becomes our first big national holiday. Okay, so that is the information for this test. We're going to end here. We will start talking about the new country when we come back on Friday. We have just a little bit of time. So if you will allow me, I want to get on my soapbox for just a second. It is time for advising. I can't believe the semester is over, is half over or almost half over. So it's time for advising. And how many of you guys, the ones in the room, know what your degree plan is? Oh, good. That's rare. Usually people don't. So maybe I don't need to get on my soapbox. But I just want to urge you to come up with a plan before you go to your advisor. Look at your degree plan. Let me give the people online a second chance. Does anybody online not know how to find their degree plan? Make a comment if you want me to show you, and I'll check it here in a second. But look at what classes you need to take. You can find the schedule online. You can find what classes are going to be offered next semester, and come up with the schedule you want. Because you're paying for it, or your parents are paying for it, or taxpayers are paying for it. And it's your life. So I want y'all to know you have the right to say, no, that's not what I want to take. You don't have to just blindly take what your advisor suggests. And they're not going to argue, they're going to work with you. Most people want, their students to succeed. So, but I want you're old enough now that, you're adults. So take charge of your own destiny. Okay, that was my soapbox. And since we got done early, you can leave early. It'll be a short class. All right, nobody's got, questions? If you're going to do that extra credit, do it by Monday. Okay.
My first one is, I already talked to my advisor, we had the meeting, and I have the next history. Are you teaching history 1302?
I think I will be. They haven't told me yet. Usually if I do, it's one of the 8. Usually I get the 8 o'clock Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but they haven't told me yet.
I don't know my schedule yet for the next semester, but I know the class. I wanted to ask if it's you, someone else in the history department.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, about the extra credit. I think I figured it out, but I wanted to ask you about it.
Okay.